Senator Rubio, good to have a chance to speak with you today.
Good to see you, Michael.
Senator Rubio, you were the first member of the Senate to announce this week that you will not be voting for a short-term budget fix to keep the government running into early April. You called it irresponsible and absurd political theater. So what's the alternative?
Well, the alternative is a handful of things. The first is a real budget to finish out the year. I voted for one already. The House passed one. It cut $61 billion in discretionary spending. And the second is to have a real budget for 2012 and going forward. And the third is to start tackling our debt. And, you know, none of this is a surprise to anyone. I think it's important to remind the viewers of how we got to where we are today. The people that ran this town a year ago, when the same party controlled the House, the Senate, and the White House, they didn't pass a budget. They refused to pass a budget. They had the votes to do it. They didn't want to make the tough choices. It's hard to believe that a multi-trillion-dollar entity like the federal government doesn't have a budget. And so now what we operate on at the federal level is these short-term budgets that are down to 2 or 3 weeks at a time. That's ridiculous. And I just got tired of it. That's not what I came up here to be a part of. I want to start taking on these issues.
Senator Rubio, the White House, the president seems to agree with you. He issued a statement yesterday in which he said, we cannot keep funding the government in 2 to 3 week increments. It's time to come together, find common ground, and resolve this issue in a sensible way. I guess the hang-up is, what's a sensible way?
Well, let me tell you what's not sensible. The president's party in the Senate about a week ago offered their view of how we should balance the budget for the rest of the year, and it will cut $6 billion. Now, that's a lot of money for you and me, but let me tell you what $6 billion means at the federal level. That's how much money the federal government borrows every 36 hours just to keep the lights on. The federal government borrows $4 billion a day. Our national debt is now up to over $14 trillion and growing at a pace of $4 billion a day. So a $6 billion cut is absurd. And the president needs to figure out which side of this issue he wants to be on and then begin to lead. Because ultimately, look, we can probably do a budget without the president, but we cannot solve the generational issue of our time, which is a government that spends more money than it takes in unless the president gets involved and leads. And right now, he's missing in action.
Senator, I read an interesting column by Paul Krugman of the New York Times, the economist at Princeton, Nobel Prize-winning columnist, economist. And here's what he had to say the other day about the whole budget debate in Congress, about the deficit and the debt. He said, quote, slashing government spending while the economy is still deeply depressed is a recipe for slower economic growth, which means lower tax receipts. So any deficit reduction from GOP cuts would be at least partly offset by lower revenue. Is Paul Krugman wrong?
I think he's wrong on multiple grounds. Let me tell you where he's first wrong, and that is that if government spending created jobs, America would be leading the world in job creation. If government spending was the way to grow your economy, we would be leading the world in economic growth, and neither one of those things is happening in the aftermath of an $800 billion so-called stimulus package that passed almost 2 years ago. The second reason why he's wrong is because the uncertainty that the debt is creating is one of the reasons why our economy is not growing. If people that invest money in economies, and that's what it takes to grow your economy, investment dollars, they're afraid to invest in the American economy because they think it's destined for high tax rates, because how else is this debt going to be paid back? Until the federal government shows that it has a plan to tackle the debt long term, we are going to struggle to get our economy growing again in a way that creates jobs and puts us on the road to prosperity. Where I do think there's some validity is, you know, we can't balance, the truth is we can't get all of our cuts out of the discretionary programs. All these cuts that are being talked about up here are only out of 16% of the budget or 14% of the budget. I mean, you can't solve 100% of the problem by only focusing on 14% of it. You've got to focus on all of it. And the real cost drivers that make our debt blow up over time are Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. I want to save those programs. I don't want them to change at all for people that are in them now, but I do want them to exist when I retire, and they're not going to if we don't reform them.
Yeah.